This podcast was recorded on April 14th, 2020. Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and people outside the binary. This is Less Stupid with Thomas Hiura, a show that's completely uncut, uncensored, and unimpressed with some of our congressional delegation here in Oregon. I'm going to be honest. That's why I'm very flattered and thrilled to have Doyle Canning on the show. Hi, Doyle. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, good morning. I'm Doyle Canning. I'm a Democrat running for Congress in Oregon's 4th District and really glad to join you this morning.
Awesome. Well, I like to start off with a question, which is, I ask this of everybody, what's one controversial opinion you have? But first, I want to make a brief disclaimer for all my, tens of fans out there that I had an allergic reaction to something, so my face is kind of red and like a little swollen. I've got Benadryl, so that's kind of tapering it off. But if I don't smile as much, that's probably because it just kind of hurts a little bit and my face is kind of dry. Yeah.
I'm sorry to hear that.
Thank you. But what, and you can define this as broadly as you want, what is a controversial opinion that you have about anything?
A controversial opinion that I have, well, parenting styles can be very personal and controversial. And I am of the opinion that little kids should spend a lot of time playing. And that's what they're getting to do right now with school being not in session. So I think it's really healthy for them to be at home and have all day to play. And some people think that's controversial, I guess.
I thought you were going to go in the direction of not hitting your kids, which I don't know how you feel about that, but some people have very strong views. I think it seems to me a little odd to have incredibly strong views either way. Like, oh, I'm definitely going to hit my kids, or, I am absolutely, well, I guess I would be a little more sympathetic to the view that, you shouldn't do that at all. But, I don't know. So, with your kids, having all this downtime right now, how are you able to, how is the transition as a parent, for you being a parent, I'm not a parent, been from having the brick and mortar schooling and now having to do everything remotely?
It's a transition for all of us, I think, of all ages, this stay-at-home order, what we're going through right now, is massive on a societal level, and it's affecting all of us in different ways. And for me as a parent, it's nice to have my kids at home more. It's also challenging I'm used to having them at school during the day, and that's when I do a lot of my organizing work, my campaigning. Sure. And so we juggle. And we had a group Zoom call of the parents for my daughter's first grade class last night, and it was great to connect with other people who are going through similar things and hear, people's strategies. Some people are, getting up very early in the morning before their children to get their own work done and getting very little sleep. Other people are trying to, homeschool and work from home at the same time. Other people have, moms especially, and this is statistically true across the country from what I've read, have quit their jobs because they can't do it all. And other people have been laid off suddenly and are now relying on our schools, grocery and lunch delivery program that they've put in place. And so, people are just going through a lot right now. And I think we need to be really kind to ourselves about how we are moving forward in this moment and taking care of each other. For me, I'm running for Congress because we deserve a government that doesn't treat us this way. The catastrophic failures of the federal government in this moment will go down in history as one of the darkest hours of our country. And so my plan and my platform for moving through this COVID crisis includes, public health has to be the top priority. Like, we can't recover the economy until we stop the virus. And in order to stop the virus, we have to stay at home. And in order to stay at home, we have to be able to make ends meet. And so that's why I support a universal basic income program for the duration of this emergency, so that everyone can be supported in doing what is necessary to stop the virus, because we really are all in this together. We're so interconnected. And as long as we have a situation where people are falling behind on their rent and mortgage payments and are falling behind, unable to put food on the table during this crisis, it will continue longer, because people will need to go out of their homes and work, and then the virus will continue to spread. So that's really, for me, at the crux of this is that we have to put the public health objective of stopping the virus at the top, at the center of the policy. And that's not what we're seeing right now. Countries like South Korea have aggressively implemented testing of, the population, and have been able to not just flatten the curve, but like get ahead of the curve because of that. And we're not doing that here. There is so much evidence of undercounting COVID, and because it's under-tested.
I think I heard that we're only 19. I don't remember how many tests there were in Oregon. I want to say it was 19 in Oregon, or maybe that was Lane County. But it's a severe under-testing that's happening for sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And
so we don't even know the true scope of this. So how are we going to get a handle on it and stop it without that? And so, for me, it's not just flatten the curve, but eradicate the virus. And to do that, we have to implement mass testing and tracing with, privacy protections, of course. But this is what public health agencies are for. This is why we have them.
Yeah.
is to manage this kind of a crisis. And our federal government isn't helping our local public health authorities do that at the scale and with the speed that's necessary right now.
Well, one thing that I appreciated about your organizing, and you do have a long history of being a community organizer, is that a few months ago when General Soleimani was killed, we had this rally at the Wayne Morse Free Speech Plaza against, warlike actions against Iran. And one of the things that stuck out very vividly, because for me, I'm a very visual kind of learner, was, and I'm talking about this because of your advocacy for universal basic income, people will often say, how are we going to pay for it? And you look at these activists who held up this really long handkerchief cloth style representation of the federal budget, and just about everything else is dwarfed by defense spending, which we kind of recognize is not entirely about our defense per se, but is about carrying out a foreign policy that is aggressive in places that, the U.S. has destabilized in the Middle East. And so, were you to become my congresswoman, the first congresswoman to ever represent this district, what would your approach be? Yeah, I think you are. What would your approach be in terms of like foreign policy and use of the defense budget that we have?
Sure. It's a great question. There's so much powerful anti-war activism here in our community, and a lot of it is led by veterans. And we have a strong partnership with our Veterans for Canning group and the endorsement of a progressive veterans organization called Common Defense. And we developed our foreign policy platform, in dialogue with the community and with veterans. How, what do we want our foreign policy to look like, and how can our district lead that conversation nationally when I represent the 4th District in Congress? And so we call the platform End the Forever Wars. And it's extensive. You can check it out on our website, which is canningforcongress.com. And some of the most important elements, which I think you're getting at, are the utterly outrageous military-industrial complex that is like a vacuum cleaner for money.
Which, by the way, Eisenhower called that the military-industrial Congressional complex back when that was in its infancy because of the role that Congress plays.
Congress has its most primary constitutional function is appropriations. Like, Congress decides the budget, and budgets are a moral document. And when we look at the budget of the United States government, we, as you point out, the budget for the Pentagon is, many times of magnitude greater than the budgets of other countries' militaries. And that is because of the extensive U.S. intervention all over the world. And these big defense contractors, that's primary profit function comes from our tax dollars. And, I think it's important to point out that our congressman has, for this campaign, this primary challenge that we're running in right now, has accepted money from the biggest defense contractors in the country. We're talking about Northrop Grumman. We're talking about Honeywell. We're talking about Lockheed Martin. We're talking about the companies that, are the beneficiaries of that big Pentagon budget. It's not the GIs and the veterans, and it's not the people who do the work of the military who are the beneficiaries of this. It's billionaires and big corporations who make bombs and drones and surveillance systems and weapons. And I don't think that's who should have the ear of our congressional representatives. And so that's why I'm running this campaign. This campaign is 100% financed by regular people in the district and people all over the country who want to support progressive champions in Congress.
Well, all over the country, I saw that Shaun King endorsed you and tweeted out about your campaign, bringing more attention to that. If anybody doesn't know him, he's an outstanding activist, particularly for the African American community and racial justice at large, but was also an integral part of Bernie Sanders' campaign as well. I was living in New York when Bernie kicked off his 2020 campaign, and I got to go down to Brooklyn at Brooklyn College, which was his alma mater, and see his very first rally, and saw Jane Sanders speak and Shaun King speak. So that was a really outstanding stamp of, excitement and approval of, this campaign that you've launched here in Oregon's 4th. I want to talk a little bit about the district, because, these Oregonians have had the same representative for, 16 terms, 30 years or something like that. And one of the things that I heard argued, and I would love to hear your response to this argument, was, this is not just the Eugene district or the Corvallis district. It extends out toward Florence and goes all the way down to the South Coast, Bandon, Gold Beach, Brookings, which I know are places where many of those places you've hosted events. The argument that I've heard is that this is such a swing district. It's not as reliably blue. And so I've heard this, frankly, from people who are strong allies of Peter DeFazio, the incumbent. And they say, if we bring in somebody who's too far left in this primary, we're going to lose in the general, because he is the perfect candidate for this district, which is why he's been able to hold it so long. Now, my thinking is, if you have a district that you call a swing district, it has to have swung. Like, this district hasn't swung since, I think, the 70s or the 80s. I lived in Minnesota's 2nd, which went back and forth between this really reprehensible John Klein guy and Angie Craig, who is currently in that seat now. So I was kind of like, yeah, you can tell me that this is a swing district if you want, but it hasn't swung in forever. I think that if we nominate someone like you who has the excitement of this grassroots campaign that you're doing, and frankly somebody who hasn't taken all these airline donations either, and you can actually stand up to some of the biggest polluters in terms of our carbon emissions, that you have a good chance. But I'm showing my bias obviously there. What's your take on that argument that this is not a safely blue district? We have to go and put the same guy in because he's got this name recognition and this kind of firewall.
Sure. Well, I appreciate your question. I think you are correct. The district has been in Democratic control since the early 1970s, since the current congressman's former boss was elected. So it's been the same political lineage since the early 70s. And the reason why there hasn't been a change is because there's never been a challenger. And I am that challenger. It's 2020. Yeah. It's not 1986. It's not 1996. It's not 2006 anymore. The district has changed. The world has changed. And what constitutes progressive leadership has changed. And, this is a progressive district in terms of the Democratic electorate. This is a district that went for Senator Sanders in 2016 by a landslide.
Yes, it did.
Lane County and Benton County by 31-point margins. Those are unheard of margins in politics.
And we're Oregon. This is like some guy from Vermont who's like 3 time zones away, and we just resonated on his message so much too, and I can appreciate that as well.
Right, and so even in those more rural, more redder counties in a general election, Bernie won the primary by double digits, hands down in everyone in 2016. So in terms of the Democratic electorate, what does the Democratic electorate want in a candidate? No corporate money, Medicare for all, an unabashed and unapologetic progressive agenda, taking on the billionaires and big corporations and fighting for us. And that's who I am. And that's why I'm running. And that's why I will win this election. And I will win the general election, because that's what the Democratic electorate wants. Now, this question of like, oh, it's a close district, it's a swing district. It's a lot about fear. It's a very similar message to what we hear from the establishment on the presidential level.
Right.
Now is not the time to break out with these big ideas. Cling to the past. Let's go back to the Obama years when things were better before Trump. For a lot of us, things were not better then. This Trump, I don't want anyone to take my words out of context to somehow make apologies for the atrocities of this administration, okay? But what I'm saying is now is the time to move forward. And now is the time to embrace the future of the Democratic Party. And the future of the Democratic Party is multiracial, is working class, is energizing young voters. And Bernie Sanders has the support overwhelmingly of the electorate under 45. And that's who's really mobilizing on this campaign in my election. I have an intergenerational coalition, absolutely, but we are seeing so much energy coming from young people, and it's really exciting. And for establishment Democrats to dismiss that and to write that off is a losing strategy in the long term. Okay? Like if we want to build the future of the party, this is the future of the party. And you may not like it, but it's a train that's coming at you. And so you can get on it or you can get out of the way.
Sure. And I frankly think that I'm 26 right now. And I frankly think people in my generation do not have the kind of automatic loyalty to the Democratic Party that has been kind of expected of people who are on the more left side of the political spectrum. And I think so people are not necessarily just going to fall in line and vote Democrat if the Democrat Party doesn't actually reach out and embrace some of those policy ideas. For example, Joe Biden kind of has been asked for many months, hey, you've got this challenger, Bernie Sanders, who has all this energy and excitement from the exact same coalition that you have rallied together here in Eugene, quite literally rallied together here in OR4. And so, and Biden says he would veto Medicare for all if Congress approved it. And so his concession most recently was, you know what? All right, I hear y'all. We're going to lower the Medicare eligibility age from 65 to 60. Hillary Clinton ran on a platform of 50 or 55 for Medicare. And so it's
like face palm. I don't
Exactly.
I don't know what to say. It's so tone deaf, and it's really disheartening because we have to beat Donald Trump. There is absolutely no question that this must happen. And in order to do that, we need to rally Democratic voters. And we can't rally Democratic voters with a platform that is even more conservative than 2016. So that is my view. Others may disagree, but that is, that's my position on it.
Sure. Well, I'm glad that you have optimism about the possibility of defeating Trump, because to be 100% honest with you, this is just me as everyday Eugenian, Oregonian, is that I'm not saying I've given up hope, but I'm saying that the likelihood that will actually occur is very low because, I was born in 93, so I've never seen a president be unseated in the midterm election in after 4 years. Clinton was 8 years, Bush 8 years, Obama 8 years. And then, I guess you could say to Trump's credit, he has a very excited base of support. And they're going to turn out, and they turned out overwhelmingly in some of these primary states. But we don't need to get all doom and gloom about that challenge of the executive branch, right? Because Congress is a co-equal branch of government. Albert Lee is somebody who I've seen running in, is that Oregon's second? I don't know if
I believe so. Yeah, in Portland.
Yeah, I think so. It's the smallest district by geography, and he talks often about how democracy requires choice, and that's a district that's been represented by the same person, Earl Blumenauer, for a full generation as well. And so, what do you think about that? Do you think he's right? Do you think democracy requires choice, or not?
I mean, obviously,
Have you been in touch with Albert at all? He's got some great ideas.
Yeah. We are both endorsed by Brand New Congress, which is an organization that originally recruited and ran Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's campaign in 2018. And Albert and I, and also Mark Gamba, who's running just to the north of us, are all endorsed by Brand New Congress. So we're part of a network of candidates all over the country who are running on the Brand New Congress platform, which is very similar to Senator Sanders' Medicare for all, aggressive climate action through a Green New Deal, and curbing the powers of immigration and customs enforcement, repairing the tremendous harm of this country's immigration policy and supporting new pathways to citizenship for people who have been living and working and paying taxes and part of our communities here for generations now. And so that is, we're in touch through the Brand New Congress, and it's great to hear you've been in touch with Albert as well.
Sure. Well, I have a friend, Tiger Gruber, who hosts a podcast called Talks with Tiger, and he had Albert on, and he has a lot of wisdom, but he dissed electric cars a little bit. I'm sitting in an electric car, so that's my only little beef with him. It makes sense, though. His whole idea is that we shouldn't be in cars in general, because it's just much more efficient to follow the model of like places like New York City, where, you know, I didn't have a car. It would have been kind of absurd to even have a car in Manhattan where I was living. And it is much more efficient, but gosh, I just do love my little vehicle here. I can play really loud music. I'm running for mayor of Eugene, as you might know. I've got the car emblazoned with Hiura for mayor, and I'm driving around playing really loud rap music and Earth, Wind, and Fire. So I go back and forth between Kendrick Lamar and Earth, Wind, and Fire, depending on what neighborhood I'm in. I actually, because this is like a kind of like an informal podcast, right? It's not the typical interview. I am a hip hop musician, but I'm also just a lover of music in general. And I like to tell people that I want to ask musicians about their politics, and I want to ask politicians about music. So, you know, these are challenging times, right? We are in we always say this phrase, unprecedented times, this crisis, right? And for me, music is a place where I find a lot of solace and comfort. Have you been listening to anything that's been helping you through it recently in terms of music?
Well, we had two great artists leave us in recent days. One was Bill Withers, who was one of my favorite artists of all time. Lovely Day is one of my favorite songs of all time, and song that we danced to at my wedding. It's something I grew up with. So I've been listening to that a lot. And also John Prine recently passed of complications from COVID, which is just heartbreaking. And
right.
I also
Withers was not COVID related. So no. I want to make that clear for people. Yeah.
And John Prine, I grew up with his music as well. And I actually used to perform in like a kind of alt country band.
No way. What did you do?
I was a vocalist. And on. The songs Paradise and Angel from Montgomery were like our signature songs. They were always like the crowd favorites and my favorites. So
wow.
It's been a long time since I picked up a guitar. I've not had a lot of time to do that in recent years.
What? You're not busy. Come on. No, I'm just kidding.
But I have been wanting to pick up a guitar and revisit those tunes to honor John Prine and to just reconnect with the power of that music.
I love that you mentioned alt country. When I think of that, I like the Avett Brothers a lot. There's a lot of internet sort of like beef between Avett Brothers and Mumford and Sons because they're in a similar kind of lane of music. And I am just like, if you know me, you know that I cannot even pretend to like Mumford and Sons. I just think that it can't happen for me. But I'll parlay this a little back into like a more of a socio-political context. I think that first of all, Lil Nas X with the song Old Town Road last year was an amazing example,
one of my favorites.
Of country hip hop crossover. Now, when I was in 2010, I was telling my band classmates about hick hop, which is what people often called country rap back then. And it's just, those are two of the genres that people have so frequently said, ask somebody about music and they're like, oh, I like everything but rap, or oh, I like everything but country. Country and rap to me are the same fucking thing. Like it is. Well,
they both have roots in the blues, right? And so
they do.
This is music that gives voice to the working class experience, and
100%.
Yeah, I'm a fan. For sure.
Right. It's just an urban reflection of what it is to feel disenfranchised versus of typically a much more rural expression of what it is to feel disenfranchised. So that's why I really like that. But on some level, I can understand that, for example, Eugene Mayor Lucy Vinnis has kind of scoffed at the idea that, hip hop is important. And that's fine. She in her generation, it didn't exist when she was growing up. She's 67. and I'm not asking you to join my bandwagon of critiquing her, but I gotta ask you, like if I were to say, what's a hip hop artist who you appreciate? This is not to say you endorse all of their content, right? But what in the hip hop vein, do you have any kind of favorite artists?
Mm-hmm. Well, I was growing up in the 90s, and like Tribe Called Quest was, that was kind of the peak. So I'm always a fan of that kind of, I guess we would call it like retro 90s.
Sure. Back then it was called alternative hip hop. Yeah. But more jazz kind of instrumentation, Q-Tip, Phife Dawg. Absolutely. Yeah.
And very political content too.
Sure.
And the Coup.
Well, the
is one of
song
my
"We
favorites.
the People," the Coup is also great. Boots Riley at your somewhat recent rally at UO again, where you talked about endorsing Bernie Sanders, and we had a bunch of awesome young activists there. "We the People" was on your playlist.
Yes.
I took note because truly, I mean, from the perspective of like respectability politics, I'm not saying that I want people to like all the Congress people to be bumping hip hop because that's super cringy. But like there shouldn't be this totally removed idea that like, hip hop music is something that, is I don't know, totally detached from politics, because at the end of the day, people are human beings and they listen to what helps speak to their experience and what inspires them to get up every day and, serve their communities. So I'm glad you had a question. I'm glad that you actually, took that question seriously and to heart, because it means a lot to me and I think to some of my listeners as well. But okay, I want to ask you about a couple of things, because climate and education are both very important in terms of the future of the society that we live in. And you mentioned that, your kids are, it's been a transition to do school from home. And I know it's been a real challenge for educators as well.
Absolutely.
And that's
they're working so hard right now.
They're working incredibly hard. I was an educator before, and I wasn't doing that in these times. So I can't even imagine the challenges. But, whether this is regarding COVID-19 and the current crisis or not, whether this is something that was part of your platform before this crisis emerged, in terms of education as a policymaker on the federal level, right? What kinds of things do you support?
Oh, yeah, it's a great question. My dream was to become a public school teacher. That's what I went to college to do. And I did my student teaching semester teaching 9th, 10th, and 11th grade social studies. So I taught history, geography, and a kind of civics class that was called Issues in American Society. And so we got to talk about lots of kind of controversial issues, which, young people are always down to do. So it was a great experience and really opened my eyes so much to, what the profession of public school teaching is and how challenging it is. And, the changes that we need to make to really support our educators and support students. And so my policy is a reflection of that and my studies of progressive education. And so I support.
Let me ask you, you called it a profession. Sorry to cut you off. And it is a profession, but it's one that's compensated practically like a hobby, So that's really unfortunate, because if you're talking about retaining the best talent in the profession, I didn't mean to cut off exactly because you were about to say the policy that you support, but having
one
better
of them
teacher
is starting
pay.
teacher salaries at $60K.
Nice.
We've seen this like wave, the Red for Ed movement of teachers all over the country, West Virginia, and even in Oregon, in Oregon, the Red for Ed walkouts weren't so much about teacher pay as they were about overall funding for schools to be more functional.
Sure.
But teacher pay needs to be on the agenda too. And so, I support 60K salaries for public school teachers starting. I support a ban on private charter schools, period.
Wow.
And I support, teachers having more respect and autonomy to respond to the needs of their individual students in real time and not be so micromanaged and boxed in by a set of standards that may be well-intentioned in that we want our kids to master a certain, vocabulary of content in order to,
Sure.
Have the education that we want them to have. But what I'm hearing from teachers is that there's just so much pressure to teach to the standardized tests that it's really difficult to have any kind of flexibility and be able to respond to where your kids are at on a given day. And so, we have to unwind this rush to overtest our kids and trust our teachers to do their job. And, I did my undergraduate thesis on privatization of public education and looking at how global trade agreements like NAFTA and the WTO categorize education as a service that can be privatized and public education as sort of a market. And so we're seeing that creeping privatization on a global scale and here in our country as well.
Well, Betsy DeVos, if people don't know, who basically runs education in this country now, had no experience at all in a public school, she had no experience as an educator at all, frankly, but then never went to any public schools herself. And really her credibility in the eyes of the Trump administration came from this advocacy that she's doing for parochial schools, in which she's making voucher programs available to funnel public money away from public schools in order to bring public dollars into parochial religious schools.
Right.
And so,
which is a tactic of segregationists that's been going on for decades.
right.
Like, let's be clear, this is a white nationalist agenda, and the policies that Betsy DeVos has pursued in terms of rolling back protections for transgender students, attacking Title IX, attacking the IDEA, the special education programs, attacking the programs that educators and advocates have been building and pushing for decades to make our schools more inclusive, equitable, and places of true multicultural learning. That's what's under attack right now. And we need people in Congress who are going to fight that agenda tooth and nail and take a stand for our kids. When we look at the data of school segregation, 60 years after Brown versus Board of Education, our schools nationally are getting more segregated. By race, not less. There's a whole host of reasons why that is happening, and we need to address all of them. And that's, why I'm running and what I will do when I serve in Congress. Now, you mentioned
fantastic.
Climate as well.
Well, let me cut you off though, because
Sure.
I know that that's been a centerpiece of your activism, and I don't think that it's just even like disheartening to hear anyone suggest that the incumbent has as credible a reputation as you on this issue, because I think that is one of the clearest distinctions in terms of if people want to really get real and get bold about tackling climate and not. But we're 40 minutes in, and before anybody walks away from this podcast, I want to ask a question about what experiences you bring that, for lack of a better word, make you qualified, because you've got this really strong agenda and you want to ban private charter schools and you want to do a lot of things that, people might consider to be, a little radical. But and I know that you have a law degree from University of Oregon, you have a JD, and a lot of Congress people, have had that, and that's a pretty great starting point. I don't have that. I'm considering going into law school. But however you would define what credibility and experience is, let's talk a little bit about what you've done, what you've accomplished in your past that makes you the right candidate for the 4th District.
Sure. So I have dedicated my life to standing with the most marginalized by our system and advocating for change. That's who I am. And I got my start as a grassroots organizer working in rural working class communities with farmers and their neighbors to take a stand against Monsanto and genetically engineered crops, which were kind of just coming in at the turn of the last century. This was around like 2001, 2002, 2003.
Sure.
And so GMOs were...
To my public
thing.
school's credit, in 2004, I was in 5th grade, and they showed the documentary The Future of Food, and that made a great case about what Monsanto was doing. They had GMO crops that were blowing off of trucks into farms, and they were getting planted into these local farmers' crop fields, and then those farmers got sued for it. So just that was such a strong enough story that I remember it now at 26 from when I was in 5th grade. So that's
right.
I'm
so
glad,
that's what we were organizing against at that time, because we had farmers who were being sued by Monsanto, these Monsanto mercenaries coming onto their property, taking samples of their crops, testing them, finding their patented genetic material, and then suing the farmer who, through no fault of their own,
sure,
unwittingly in some cases, like this happened. And so this is a classic example of a big corporation that wants power and control and is, running roughshod over the rights of working class rural communities. And we have the same kind of dynamics here today with the Jordan Cove pipeline and with the aerial spraying that's going on in rural Oregon.
Yep.
And that's who I am, is standing with communities against these big corporations and calling them out and calling for change. And so when you ask about my qualifications, the incumbent and I have a very different set of life experiences on a number of levels. But fundamentally, I am not a career politician. I am a community organizer, and what I do is build coalitions, bring people together, and make change happen. I am not here to uphold the status quo or play the inside game. I'm here to change the game. And that's why I'm running, and that's who I am. And if we don't change this game, our planet is in really big trouble. We have to get the influence of fossil fuels and big polluters out of politics. And I'm part of a movement of people all over the country who are working towards that. That's why I have the support of the Sunrise Movement in Eugene, in Corvallis, in Portland. That's why I have the support of Climate Hawks Vote. That's why I have the support of 350 Action, of Naomi Klein, of Bill McKibben, of Josh Fox, of the leaders of the climate movement are backing my campaign for Congress because they know that I'm a champion for the climate, that this isn't greenwashing for me. This is my life's work. And what I have dedicated my career to is taking a stand with communities who are fighting pipelines and coal mines and indigenous peoples who are calling for just solutions to climate change that do not infringe on their rights. And that is who I will be in Congress. And so my qualifications, you mentioned my law degree. I studied with the country's preeminent legal scholars in the climate field. I studied the Paris Agreement at length. I studied the environmental statutes at length. I worked as a student law clerk on the Juliana versus United States case in the federal court in Eugene. I've read the evidence. I helped write the summary judgment opinion. I know climate law inside and out, and I know that we don't have the laws that we need to manage this crisis. We need a whole new framework. And Congress has the power to do that. Only Congress has the power to do that. The courts can't do it. The executive can't do it. It's Congress who has to do it. And that's why I'm running for Congress. And, I've published a book twice. It's called Reimagining Change. And it's all about how communities and social movements can change the story about what is possible, can change the fundamental dynamics of politics when we organize. And that's who I am and how I will approach my role representing this district. It's different than an establishment politician. This is about a people's movement, and this is about giving a voice to the people in this district in the halls of power and supporting the changes that we need. Medicare for All is one of the most popular policies in America today.
Sure.
In Oregon, it's overwhelmingly popular amongst Democrats, amongst Republicans, and independents.
Hey, I'm
Everybody
a competitive
wants
person. I'm half Japanese. Asians are competitive as hell. I don't like to see other countries in Europe trampling on us. I don't like to see Canada kicking our ass in terms of having a greater percentage of their population have a very strong healthcare system. Our policy in this country is basically don't get sick. And even in terms of COVID right now, that is which being shown that we have done a good job of flattening the curve, and we haven't overwhelmed our medical facilities in general. Thank goodness. But it also means that if that happens, that anybody who isn't impacted by COVID, is going to have a much harder time getting their needs taken care of by an overwhelmed medical system as well. And I don't even want to say that in terms of we haven't been overwhelmed. I don't want to minimize what has happened in terms of I'm seeing a lot of videos of nurse practitioners and physicians, coming home in tears every day because of the serious challenges that they're facing. And people will kind of think as though those people are immune to seeing a patient die. That is not at all the case. People are affected deeply when they see those kinds of things happen.
Absolutely. And so my point is that Medicare for All is really popular. We know we need it. And other countries have it. We know how to do it. Why isn't it getting done? It's because of the grip of the health insurance industry, the pharmaceutical industry, those who profit from the current model, which is clearly not serving us in the ways that it should and that we deserve. The only way that's going to change is if we have a mass movement of people who put people into office in Congress who are absolutely 100% committed to Medicare for All and are ready to fight for it and are ready to leverage the power of the people and bring that to bear on the political process. And we won't get it just because we want it. We won't get it just because we're right. We won't get it if we, don't fight for it. And that's why I'm running, because we need to fight for it right now. And if there was ever a time when, people were clear about what their priorities are in terms of Medicare for All, it's right now. And if you are not out there advocating for health care for everyone right now in the midst of this crisis, you are not a champion for Medicare for All. And that's the case with our congressman. His priority has been bailing out the airlines. He has said nothing about universal health care in this moment. So, let that be, people show you who they are, not with their words, but with their actions. And, this is the time to really rise in leadership and make those bold calls. And Senator Sanders is doing that. Jayapal is doing that. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is doing that. And those are the progressive standard bearers in the party today. And that's, that's where our district wants to be aligned,
right.
clearly from the results of the election in 2016. And so I know we're running out of time. So do you have any other questions?
Sure, absolutely. Well, I want to ask you about sort of this is related to what you said about climate and about Medicare for all, because we live in a time that's very politically polarized, right? And where I'm like a anti-binaries person in general, right? So like I identify as non-binary in terms of my gender, but I just think I'm like anti-binary in terms of our political culture as well. It's not a simple you're left or you're right or you're somewhere in the middle. It's kind of like all over the place, right? And so to ask you a bit of like a challenging question about, the way that Medicare for all, which sounds great for someone like you or me, can get framed, even on the presidential debate stages with John Delaney and Pete Buttigieg talking about, that's a policy that's going to take things away. And policies like the Green New Deal, climate policy will often get framed from the perspective of taking away my right to, pollute this much or to, do whatever I want in terms of liberty, right? So how do you respond to those kinds of arguments that, the radical left is trying to take things away, take away people's rights, take away private insurance that, some people feel is adequate through their employer, et cetera?
Mm-hmm. Well, labor unions in this country have fought really hard for healthcare. My husband's included, okay? Like the fundamental contract fight we had with the University of Oregon was about our health insurance. And so nobody wants to take away great health insurance from people. What we want to do is expand the possibility of great healthcare for everybody. And the more conservative wing of the Democratic Party, particularly in this presidential primary, that was their narrative, like you're saying, of Bernie wants to take your health care away, which is a narrative of fear.
Right.
And that is what we're seeing in this election as well. Be afraid. Be afraid. Things can't get better for you. So just be afraid and try to keep what you have. It's a zero-sum game. And I don't lead with fear. I lead with possibility. I lead with compassion. I lead with what is possible. And if the United States Congress can suddenly write a check for $2 trillion, okay, like we can do Medicare for all. If it is urgent, it will happen. And so we need to make it urgent. And, my view is that we need a just transition in the fossil fuel sector for those who may be displaced from their jobs from a Medicare for all plan. Like we can find a way forward. We can find a solution. It's about political will and it's about priorities. And my priority is always going to be to take care of working people. And if, billionaires are upset about that, I'm okay with that. And and so we need to be okay with that. Like this is about making change and changing the fundamental problems in our system that create profits for very few and create poverty and suffering for millions of Americans. It doesn't have to be like that. And, again, that's why I'm running for Congress.
All right. I love it. I have two more questions. I promise. It won't be more than two more. The last one is going to be related to the title of the show, and it's something I ask everybody. But the second to last one, the penultimate question, is we live in this very Democrat versus Republican world, but the way that things get done in Congress is by bipartisan action much of the time, right? And this could be. I want to ask you to give credit to a Republican, and that could be a federal Republican. It could have been a past Republican president in recent memory. It could have been the current president. It could be a state senator, anybody. I would love to see you give credit to a Republican for having done something that you agree with or support. What do you think? What do you got?
It's hard to find an example of that in recent times, but I could say, in the 1980s, President Reagan signed off on amnesty for every undocumented person in the country. Okay, that was a Republican, mainstream Republican policy position. And their platform has veered so far to the right now that is like unthinkable. But that is where we were 30 years ago. And Democrats are to the right of that now, for the most part.
Many of them, yeah.
And so, we have to consider, the window of possibility and how to reopen it, and how to change the political dynamics. And that's, part of what my campaign is about.
Awesome. I think that's a great answer. Okay, so the last question, and I want to thank you so much. Doyle Canning, running for Congress in Oregon's 4th District. Really exciting campaign. Time to take a stand is the slogan. And I want to ask you what I ask everybody on the podcast is, what's one way we could all be a little less stupid?
Gosh, I generally think people are always doing their best. And so I guess, I don't know. I don't know the answer to your question.
It's an aggressive question. Yeah, it's
I mean, I can speak for myself and say, I know that I perform better, that I'm sharper when I take care of my health. And so I try to get enough sleep, eat well, exercise, all of that. It helps us think better as well as be healthier in general. So awesome. I encourage that, I guess I would say.
I got to ask a congressional candidate that question. I love it. Well, thank you all so much. How can people support what you're doing? How can people find you on the internet? I'll roll out the red carpet for you.
Oh, thank you. So our website is canningforcongress.com, and we're Canning for Congress on Facebook and Instagram, Canning for Oregon on Twitter. And we have a headquarters on kind of the edge of the Whitaker on West 6th Avenue. It's closed to the public right now, which is such a bummer. I really miss people stopping by. But you can always stop by on social media, and you can call us. We're at 541-357-1206. You can text us there as well. And we want to be in touch with people during this time of social distancing. We also have a weekly coffee hour on Zoom. It's on Sundays at 10 a.m. And that is a place to stop by and ask me any questions, meet other people who are interested in the campaign, see how you can get involved. So definitely join us on Sunday mornings. And we also have a show on Facebook Live. It's called Between Two Furs. And basically my campaign manager, Kelly, hosts the show, and she asks me questions that supporters and others write in on social media. You can private message us a question anytime, and we will discuss it on the Between Two Furs show. And we need your support. We need your vote. April 28th is the deadline to register to vote.
And people must be a Democrat, registered as a Democrat, in order to vote in the Democratic primary in Oregon for
That's
you.
right. And
they don't have to do it to vote for me, but they have to do it to vote for you.
Yes, and it's real important. You can register through our website, canningforcongress.com/register to vote. It'll walk you through the process. It's easy to do online. And really important, if you don't do that by April 28th, you will not get a ballot to vote in this election. And you don't want to miss out. This is a really, really exciting time. And so the ballots will be coming at the end of April. You'll have about 2 weeks to get your ballot back by May 19th. And vote Canning for Congress. tell your friends, post on social media, let people know about this campaign. And, you know, if you're excited about this campaign, shout it, tell the world.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I won't take up any of your time any further. I think you've certainly earned my endorsement and my vote. Not that that means much, but I think that we're all really excited about what you're doing and what you're going to do for our country. Thank you, Doyle.
Yeah, you are so welcome. Thank you. Take good care of yourself.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.